All right, good morning, church family. As you guys find your seats, if you would open your Bibles to the book of James. We started a new study last week after finishing the book of Numbers. We had been going through Numbers for almost a year, and last week we started the book of James. So if you're visiting this morning, you've only missed 1 week of the series. We looked at the first 4 verses of James, and this morning we're going to look at 4 verses, James 1, 5 to 8. The title of the sermon is this: God promised to give wisdom. So let's read the text. I'll open us in a word of prayer, and then we'll jump into the sermon this morning. James chapter 1, beginning in verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. If you will, pray with me. God, I pray this morning that you would please give us the gift of faith to believe that when we need wisdom and when we come to you and ask for it, you will give it. Give us faith to believe, God, that you have promised this. It is not a maybe. It is not a on some days, but that you have promised your children that if any of us lacks wisdom, all we have to do is come to you and ask in faith, and you will give it. Help us to believe that this morning, Lord. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Yesterday, I was helping my son Ezra with one of his essays. I don't normally get involved in the schoolwork. Lauren usually does that, but I was helping him with his essay. He did not know that I was going to help him with his essay. And one of the essay question was something along the lines of, if you have 3 wishes, what would you wish for? And that was the assignment that his teacher at the co-op. If you had 3 wishes, what would you wish for? You know what his wishes were? Number 1, that he would glorify God. Number 2, God would give him wisdom. And number 3, that he would be able to accept God's will. As a dad, there are a few things you could be more proud of. You know, that's a very common question, right? If you had 3 wishes, there's always but you can't ask for more wishes. It's in the movie Aladdin, right? That idea. Sometimes, we may wish ourselves like, well, I would love for that to happen. This actually did happen to someone one time. Except that it was 1 wish. God came to Solomon and he said to him, ask what I shall give to you. In other words, he basically told Solomon, you have 1 wish. Name it. I'll give it to you. Out of all the things that Solomon could ask for, do you remember what his request was? He said, give me now wisdom and knowledge. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern good from evil. You may read that story and think, I would love to have that opportunity. I wish God would give me 1 wish. I wish God would say, name it and it's yours. Well, we may not get that offer. But here's the thing. We do get access to the very same thing that Solomon asked for and that God gave him. Because God, in this verse, has promised to give us wisdom. And that's what the sermon is about this morning. God promises to give his people wisdom. As we work our way through the text, I'm going to start with an exposition of the text. I'm going to break it down, break down these 4 verses into 9 parts. And then I'll give application at the end. So let's start looking at verse 5a, where James writes, "If any of you lacks wisdom." Now, last week, James had said that God gives us trials, and these trials are to produce steadfastness in our life. And then he says, let steadfastness have its full effect. And the reason for this is that we will then be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Lacking in nothing. But then here James says, if any of you lacks wisdom. We must remember that when James says lacking in nothing, that is on the day of judgment. He is saying that on the day of judgment, we will lack nothing. We will be perfect and complete. Until then, we all lack in things. All of us lack in multiple things. And one of the things that we lack is wisdom. James writes, if any of you lacks wisdom. Let's break this down. He says, if any of you. Now the reality is that all of us lack wisdom. Nobody is perfectly wise except Jesus Christ. If any of you lacks, the word for lacks here is the same word in verse 4. Same exact word. It means to be deficient in something that ought to be present for whatever reason. If any of you lacks what? Wisdom. Now that raises the question, what is wisdom? Well, we could take the whole rest of the sermon on that topic, right? I'm going to give my personal definition. I'm not saying you need to go with this definition. I'm not saying it's the best definition. Through the years, I have tried to come up with a definition for this. There are multiple definitions of wisdom, but this is how I understand the term being used in Scripture. Here's my personal, and I've shortened it from the way I traditionally define it. Here it is. Wisdom is the ability to discern right from wrong and the good from the best. In other words, 2 parts of this. Wisdom is the, we don't think of wisdom as making like good decisions but really wisdom is the ability to discern right from wrong, right? Can I discern what's right and what's wrong? What is God's will and what is not God's will? It also is the ability to discern what is good from what is best. Often there can be 2 choices where both are right, but one of them is better than the other. Right? God lays 2 choices before you. Neither of them will be disobedience. Wisdom is the ability to discern what is a good decision and what is the best decision. That's what I'm going to go with. It's okay if you define this differently. Let's look at verse 5b. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. Let him ask God. Now, as I frequently like to point out, we should always notice what the text doesn't say. James doesn't say, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him research diligently. If any of you lacks wisdom, make your best possible decision. If any of you lacks wisdom, ask a wise person. Now, none of those are wrong. They are just not the best thing that we can do. If we need wisdom, the very best thing that any of us can do is to ask God. I want to point out that this is not a suggestion. Ask in the Greek is an imperative verb. It's a command. In fact, there's only one other person in the New Testament that actually commands us to ask, and it is the Lord Jesus Christ. 3 times Jesus commands us to ask our Father. Now, why should we ask God? 5c. Who gives generously to all without reproach. I want you to notice 4 descriptions of how God gives. Number 1, continuously. Continuously. Gives is a participle, which means it's an ongoing action. It's not as though God gives one time, where you ask God for wisdom and he gives it to you that once, and it's like a one-time deal, and that's it. You used up your wisdom card for all of the rest of your life. God gives wisdom continuously through the Christian life. Number 2, he gives generously. Generously. This is not the normal Greek word for generously. It's a different Greek word. It means straightforward, simply, above board, sincerely, openly. It really carries the idea that God gives with a simple mind. The best translation might be a sincere mind, a sincere heart. God gives wisdom with a sincere heart. Number 3, he gives to all. All. Not just to pastors, not just to elders, not just to deacons, not just to teachers, not just to missionaries, not just to the leaders, not just to the mature, but to all who ask. Everyone who asks, he gives. It's children. And 4, he gives without reproach. What does that mean, without reproach? Literally without finding fault, without reprimand. In other words, God doesn't shame us that we need wisdom. He is not like an earthly father that when your 25-year-old son asks you, Dad, how do I change a tire? What's wrong with you? You don't know how to change a tire? You're 25. Now some of you are like, I don't know how to change a tire. He is not like that where he reprimands us, shames us that we don't know something. Looking for 5D. And it will be given him. It will be given him. The verb here is a future passive indicative. All of those matter. It's not just a grammar lesson here. It's a future passive indicative. All of those matter. First, it's a future verb. What does that mean? It means God will give this wisdom at a later time. He might give it right then and there, but it's important that we not think of God as a computer where we just simply go and download wisdom. Right? When you pray, it's not as though God right then, right there downloads it to you. It doesn't work that way. God gives wisdom when he's ready to give it. Future verb. It's a passive verb. Why is that important? It means wisdom is not achieved. Wisdom is not earned. It's not learned. It's given. It is a gift. And it is future, it is passive, and it is indicative. Indicative is the mood of reality. What does that mean? It's a promise. James is saying, if you ask God for wisdom, he will give it to you. Not he might. Not he'll think about it. He will give it. Now, if you read just verse 5, it seems like there are no conditions to this. But verse 6 clears this up. Look at verse 6a. But let him ask in faith. So there is one condition to this asking with two sides. One condition, two sides. The first side is this. Let him ask in faith. Now, two questions to that. Number one, what does it mean to ask in faith? What does that mean to ask God for wisdom and faith? It means this. It means to believe verse 5. It means to believe verse 5. Remember the two blind men who were crying out to Jesus? Do you remember what Jesus said to them? Jesus walked up to them and he said this. Do you believe that I am able to do this? And they said, yes. To ask in faith means two things. A, it means to believe that God is able to do anything that we're asking him. And B, it means to believe that God will give me his very best, even if his best is no. That's what it means to ask in faith. Number two, why do we need to ask in faith? Why faith? A lot of humility. Ask sincerely. Ask persistently. Why is it faith? Why does he say ask in faith? Because as the author of Hebrews writes, without faith it is impossible to please him, for whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and rewards those who seek him. You must believe that God rewards those who seek him. 6b. With no doubting. The other side of the condition. Remember I said one condition, two sides. The other side of this condition is this. With no doubting. Now, two questions with this. Number one, what is doubt? When it says no doubting, what does it mean to doubt? What is doubt? Here's a definition of the Greek word. To be uncertain, to be at odds with oneself, to waver. Waver is actually the best translation there. It's more. It literally means like to waver, right? You're kind of just wavering, like, somebody, hey man, you want to go hiking this weekend? That's the idea. It's to waver. Doubt can come in many forms. Doubting God's ability, God's wisdom, God's character, God's discernment, God's judgment. Doubt can come in many forms. Number two, second question, why must there be no doubting? Why do we need to ask in faith with no doubting? Here's why. Because doubt is the enemy of faith. They will not coexist. They might coexist for a short period of time, but one of them will squeeze the other one out. They won't stay together. One of them will eventually push the other one out. That's just how it works. Verse 6c, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. What does James mean by this? The one who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. James is making the point. We can either be a wave or a rock. Have you ever watched the sea on a stormy day? The waves are extremely unstable. They're extremely unpredictable. They're just going left to right, up and down. The wind blows and the waves just go all over the place, right? Contrast this with a giant rock in the ocean. Stormy it gets, it doesn't move. You see, the enemy has all kinds of wind currents. Currents of anxiety, wind currents of fear, wind currents of anger, wind currents of worldliness. And what doubt does, it raises a sail and gives the enemy something to work with. In other words, when we doubt, we have raised a sail. The enemy will just toss you back and forth. Belief, doubt, trust, I don't know. I like God, I'm not sure. I like God's plan, I don't know. That's what doubt does. Look at verse 7. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. Now, he says that person. Who is that person? It's the doubting person in verse 6. That person is the doubting person in verse 6. James says he must not suppose. Could also be translated as think or expect. He must not think or expect. He must not think or expect that he will receive anything from the Lord. Now, I want to be clear. James is not saying that God will never answer our prayers if we have doubt. He's not saying that. God is merciful. God is gracious. And he may choose to give us something in spite of our doubt. He may very well do that. But James is saying we shouldn't expect to receive it if we have doubt. Now, why would God withhold because we have doubt? In other words, if I ask God for something, but I doubt whether he's actually going to give it to me, why would God withhold it because I have doubt? Well, think of it like this. Imagine if God always gave us what we asked for despite our doubt. How would we ever grow? How would we ever learn to trust him? Look at verse 8. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. What does it mean to be a double-minded man? The Greek word is dipsychos. You can see like psychos can mean soul or mind, and then di meaning double or two. A lot of commentators think that James invented this word, this Greek word. Literally two souls or two minds. In other words, has one mind for the Lord and one mind for the world. One mind for the Lord, one mind for the world. This reminds us of Jesus' words when he said, no one can serve two masters. Here's what it's like. It's like this. I trust God. I do. But what about this? I know God will give me what I need. But what if he doesn't? What if he doesn't? I know God is able. Matt, yes. I know God is able. I just need a backup plan just in case. James says this is a double-minded person. And their double-mindedness makes them unstable. It can also be translated restless. In other words, produces rest for our souls. Doubt produces anxiety. I have never met someone who was, I would call to be an anxious person, who I thought rested in the sovereignty of God. And vice versa, I have never met someone that rested in the sovereignty of God, who was just constantly anxious all the time. Application of the text. I have 7 points of application. Number 1, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, i.e., acknowledge that we lack it. It's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, i.e., acknowledge that we lack it. You ever heard the phrase, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know? You ever heard that idea, right? The more you know, the more you realize you don't know. The idea is that the person who boasts in their knowledge, you ever meet somebody who kind of boasts in how much they know? All they actually are testifying to is their ignorance. If someone boasts in what they know, all they are testifying to is their own ignorance. Because the truly knowledgeable person knows how much they don't know. The same is true for wisdom. The wise know they are not wise. Not in and of themselves. They recognize that in and of myself, I am not wise. That's why Solomon wrote, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. It implies that to be wise, you already have to have some measure of wisdom to know that you need wisdom. James writes, if any of you lacks wisdom, we all lack wisdom. There is only one who is perfectly wise at all times. And we all need wisdom as a result. It's common when young men finish seminary. This was true of me too. It's very common when young men finish seminary to think that they know something. But knowledge is not wisdom. Doctrine is not wisdom. Bible competency is not wisdom. Experience is not wisdom. You see, in the economics of wisdom, we are all running a deficit. Number 2, there are 2 AIs. There is artificial intelligence, and there is the author of intelligence. There are 2 AIs. There is artificial intelligence, and there is the author of intelligence. I was watching a YouTube video several years back. This was several years ago. And it was discussing how there is a growing disconnect between young adults and their parents, and especially their grandparents. There's a growing disconnect, right? And what this video was saying is that one of the reasons for this is that young people, no longer need their parents or grandparents for advice. One of the examples it gave was that if something was broken in your car or something was broken in your house, in years past, people would call up their dad or call up their grandpa, and they would help you or they would give advice. Or if you're baking something and it's just not turning out the way that you want it to turn out for whatever reason, they would call up their mom or their grandma and they would help you. But now we have YouTube. Need to change out your brake light? There's a YouTube video for that. I realized I was guilty of this. If I have a question on how to fix something, I just go to YouTube. There's a video for how to do it. Now, this was several years ago. How much more is it true now with AI? People look up on AI, people look up marriage advice. That's fascinating to me. People look up marriage advice. I actually saw an article yesterday. This is after I wrote the sermon. I saw an article yesterday that said people are turning to AI for financial advice. People look up marriage advice. They look up financial advice. They look up career advice. They look up health advice with AI. And I'll be honest, if you think I'm just like a curmudgeon, grumpy old man, listen, it's impressive. I'm a fan. I like it. My wife, I cannot convince my wife. She refuses to use it. I'm in. I'm for it. But here's where I want to caution us. Here's where I want to caution us. James doesn't say, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask ChatGPT. Let him ask Gemini. Let him ask Copilot. I don't think anybody's asking Copilot. Sorry, Microsoft people. He says, let him ask God. There are two AIs, artificial intelligence and the author of intelligence. You see, the world can give us knowledge. It can give us information. It can give us facts. It can give us statistics. It can give us methods. It can give us ideas. It can give us advice. But here's what it cannot give: wisdom. Only God can give wisdom. AI may take the place of your mom or dad or grandpa or grandma. I hope that it doesn't, but it may. Do not let it take the place of your God. You will never, I don't care how good they get this, you will never outgrow your need to ask God. Three, our God gives continuously, generously, impartially, and ungrudgingly. We looked at those earlier. Continuously, generously, impartially, and ungrudgingly. And this is so important. Why? Because I find that sometimes we are tempted to believe that God gives occasionally, sparingly, arbitrarily, and begrudgingly. We ask God for something and we think maybe He'll give it, maybe He won't. If He does give it, it'll probably be the bare minimum. If he doesn't give it, it's probably because I'm not on his good side this week. He probably resents me for asking him in the first place. It's very easy for us to have a warped view of who our Father is. And yet James tells us we are to ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach. He gives 4 descriptions in that phrase. I'm going to look at them briefly. Number 1, he gives continuously. Gives is a participle, as I mentioned, which means he doesn't just give once, he gives continuously. He did not give his people manna for the first year in the desert and tell them, all right, guys, y'all figure it out from here. He gave them manna all 40 years in the desert. Number 2, he gives generously. Jesus did not just give wine at the wedding. He gave 6 stone jars of it. He didn't just give a few pieces of bread and fish. He gave them enough until they all were satisfied. He didn't just give them fish in their nets. He gave them so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. Our God gives generously. Number 3, he gives impartially. God doesn't play favorites. He doesn't play favorites. Jesus took the time to heal the bleeding woman before he went to the ruler of the synagogue's house. And 4, he doesn't give, he gives ungrudgingly. When we ask God for something, God never thinks, what's wrong with you? You're asking again? Didn't you just ask me yesterday for wisdom? You need it again today? Matt, you're about to turn 44. You should know this by now. God never thinks that. Our God gives continuously, generously, impartially, and ungrudgingly. Number 4, wisdom is a rare jewel, but God has promised to give it. Wisdom is a rare, rare jewel, but God has promised to give it. If you want to learn the performing arts and music, you can enroll at Juilliard. If you want to learn film and media, you can enroll in the American Film Institute. If you want to learn law, you can enroll at Harvard Law School. If you want to learn medicine, you can enroll at Johns Hopkins. If you want to learn business, you can enroll at the Wharton School. But if you want to be wise, where do you enroll? Chinese Southern Baptist Church. No. Where do you get wisdom? Now, one answer is to read this book. Here's the problem. Anybody can read this book. Jonathan can read this book. I can go out to somebody out there on drugs who is lost, and they can read this book. Wisdom is knowing how to use this book and how to apply it correctly. Wisdom is a rare jewel. Job says, "Where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living." Job 28. Solomon writes, "She," meaning wisdom personified, "she is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her." You see, friends, you can find knowledge, you can find skill, you can find success, you can find love, you can find friends, you can find money, but where can you find wisdom? It is a rare jewel. But God has promised to give it. James says, let him ask God, and it will be given him. That is a promise. And brothers and sisters, I got to be honest, that's an encouraging one, isn't it? Because how many times do we just feel stuck? And we think, I don't know what to do. I don't know. Should I date? Should I not? Should I marry this person or should I not? Should I invest or should I not? Should I change majors or should I not? Change jobs or should I not? Should we change churches or should we not? Should we have another child or should we? How are you going to make these decisions? God has promised to give you wisdom. Don't doubt that. Don't doubt that He will give you wisdom to make the right decision. 5, faith is the key that unlocks God's pantry. And no, I didn't intentionally rhyme that. But afterward I realized, I was like, oh no, it rhymes. Faith is the key that unlocks God's pantry. Verse 5 seems like an unconditional statement, doesn't it? In many ways it is. In many ways it is. But James gives this but in verse 6. It's a condition to verse 5 with two sides. The first side of the condition is this: we must ask in faith. Again, I always like to read what is not there in the text. James doesn't say, let him ask with maturity. It doesn't say, let him ask with humility. Let him ask with patience. Let him ask with persistence. Now, those are all. But the condition that James gives is this: let him ask in faith. You see, God has storehouses of mercy and grace and blessing and wisdom. He has storehouses of it. And faith is the key that unlocks God's pantry. Now, I want to be clear that faith is not just James's pet project. It's not something like, man, James, he was really big into faith. I don't know why, but he was really big into it. How many times did Jesus address faith? 5 times Jesus said, oh, you of little what? Faith. When the friends brought their paralytic to Jesus, what did Jesus see? When Jesus saw their determination? No. Their faith. When Jesus looked at the bleeding woman, what did he see? Her faith. Jesus said to the blind man, according to your what? Faith, be it done to you. Jesus said, whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have what? Faith. Brothers and sisters, if you want God to work in your life, then have faith. You're like, well, where do I get faith? Pray for it. You're like, wait a minute. So if I want wisdom, I need to have faith to have wisdom. If I want faith, I need to pray to have faith. If I need to have faith to pray to have faith, the beginning of faith is this: get faith. It all starts on your knees. It's got to start somewhere. So if you're not even there yet to say, I need wisdom, I don't believe that, then just start and say, God, would you just start by giving me faith? 6, doubt is like a hole in a raft. If left unattended, it sinks the vessel. Doubt is like a hole in a raft. If left unattended, it sinks the vessel. The other side of this condition is this: with no doubting. James says that the one who doubts should not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. Now let me clarify two things that James is not saying here. There are denominations that teach this, and I want to clarify there are two things he is not saying this. Number one, James is not saying that as long as we have faith and we don't doubt, we will always get what we ask for. He's not saying that. Faith and no doubt is necessary to get what we're asking for. It is not sufficient. Now, for wisdom, it is. But not for everything else. It is not to say, Lord, give me a spouse, and I believe it. I don't doubt you'll give it to me at all. Doesn't mean he will. That is a necessary condition. It is not a sufficient condition. 2, James is not saying that if we don't get what we ask for, it means one of two things. Either A, we didn't have enough faith, or B, we doubted. If you don't get what you're asking for, it doesn't mean that either A, you didn't have enough faith, or B, you had doubt. It doesn't mean that. I recently sat down at a coffee shop with someone, and they were asking me, how are they to think of their doubts? They weren't sure if it was normal for a Christian to have doubts. And they thought, if I do have doubts, that maybe it means I'm not even a Christian, right? Because I feel like, they were like, I go to church and it seems like people here, like nobody else here has doubts, and I feel like I'm the only one who has it. Does that mean I'm not saved? Does it mean I'm not a Christian? The I would give is this: doubt is like a hole in the raft. If left unattended, it will sink the vessel. Remember the father who brought his demon-possessed son to the disciples while Jesus and the other 3 disciples were up on the mountain? They brought him to the disciples, the other 9, and they couldn't cast out the demon. And when Jesus came down, he approached the father, and they bring the boy to Jesus, and the father says to him, "But if you can do anything, have compassion on us." Do you remember what Jesus said to him? If you can. If you can. All things are possible for the one who believes. Now, immediately, the father of the child cried out this: "I believe, help my unbelief." Now, what does that mean? Now, here's the thing. Did Jesus turn to him when he said this, "I believe, help my unbelief"? Did Jesus turn to him and say, "Sorry, you have doubt. I'm not going to heal him. See ya. You just admitted you had doubt. Sorry." He heals the boy. He heals him. Now, interesting enough that when the disciples came to Jesus later, they asked, they said, "Why couldn't we cast the demon out?" Do you remember what Jesus said to them? "Because of your little faith." Now, how do we make sense of that? Here's how I think we should make sense of this. It appears to me that the disciples were looking to themselves to heal this boy. They thought they could do it on demand because they had done it before. And because they were looking to themselves, their faith was lacking. But the father, well, he looked to Jesus. Even though his faith is small, his faith is struggling, it's barely there, he looked to Jesus. How do we know that? Because of the word help. Help my unbelief. He's basically saying, my raft is floating, but it's sinking. Help me. See, brothers and sisters, doubt can take many forms. Doubt, you can doubt the goodness of God. You can doubt the power of God. You can doubt the plan of God. You can doubt the purpose of God. You can doubt the love of God. You can doubt the wisdom of God. You can doubt the justice of God. And that doubt in your heart, it is like a hole in your raft. And if you leave it unattended, it will sink the vessel. We must go to God in faith. Even if we are struggling in doubt, we must go to God and ask Him, God, will you patch up this hole? I've actually got a lot of holes in my raft. Will you patch them up? 7, last point. Faith gives you an anchor. Doubt gives the enemy a sail. Faith gives you an anchor. Doubt gives the enemy a sail. James says that a person who doubts is like the sea. And the sea is totally beholden to the wind. The wind blows and it drives and it tosses this sea back and forth. And it's chaotic. Right? You ever met somebody? You ever met somebody who's chaotic? James calls a man with doubt a double-minded man, stable in all his ways. We sometimes call this spiritual schizophrenia. Think of it like this. If your heart and your mind and your soul is a ship on the sea, your heart, your mind, your soul, it's a ship on the sea. Faith gives you an anchor. Doubt gives the enemy a sail. Faith not only brings our vessel to God, but it anchors us in the harbor of God. And no matter how much the wind blows, we are well anchored in the Lord. But doubt gives the enemy a sail. It gives him something to work with. The enemy stirs up storms. That's what he does. Last week we looked at trials. A lot of these trials are from the enemy. He stirs up storms, and these storms will toss us back and forth. One moment we are trusting God, and the next moment we are trusting ourselves. One moment we are following God's plan, and the next moment we are following the world's plan. One moment we are freely resting in the sovereignty of God, and the next moment we are imprisoned by our own anxiety. Brothers and sisters, there's always a storm on the horizon. You look out of your life, there's always a storm on the horizon. Doubt raises a sail, and it gives the enemy something to work with. Drop your anchor into the ocean of God's providence, and you will not be easily moved. Let's pray.